The folder was sitting on the kitchen table when I got home that evening. A plain manila envelope, the kind you'd pick up at Staples for $2. My stepfather hadn't even tried to hide it. I set my keys down and looked at it for a long moment. I didn't touch it. I already knew what it was. Before I get into what happened next, I want to ask you something. Leave your answer in the comments. What's the worst thing a parent figure has ever taken from you? Not a thing, not money, but something you can never get back. I'll tell you mine by the end of this. My name is Elise. I'm 31 years old, and I've lived most of my life trying to earn a place in a family that was never really mine to begin with. My mom passed away when I was 9, from an ovarian cancer that moved faster than anyone expected. One summer she was tired all the time. By October she was in the hospital. By February she was gone. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because everything that came after, every single thing, started there. My stepfather, who I'd called by his first name since I was 12 because he'd asked me to, had been in my mother's life for about 3 years before she died. They got married quietly at City Hall. I remember wearing a yellow dress and holding a small bouquet of daisies my mom had picked out for me. I thought it meant we were going to be okay, that this man, with his calm voice and his habit of making pancakes on Sunday mornings, was going to stick around. And he did. He stuck around. He just made sure I knew, in 100 small ways, that sticking around wasn't the same as choosing me. He had a daughter from his first marriage, Kelsey. She was 2 years older than me, and she had his eyes and his laugh and the kind of ease in her own skin that I spent years trying to imitate. She wasn't cruel to me, not exactly. She just existed in that house like she owned it, because as far as her father was concerned, she did. The house itself had been my mother's. She'd bought it in 1998. Before she met anyone, before she had me, back when she was 26 and working double shifts at the hospital as a registered nurse. It was a 2-story Victorian semi-detached in Hamilton, Ontario, not flashy, but solid. Original hardwood floors, a bay window in the front room, a backyard with a maple tree my mom had planted herself. She was proud of that house in a way that was quiet and deep, the way she was proud of most things. When she died, she left a will. She'd had it drawn up not long after her diagnosis, and her lawyer had made sure everything was in order. The house was to go to me, held in trust until I turned 25, with my stepfather allowed to remain living there during that period, as long as he maintained the property and the property taxes. It was her way of making sure I'd have something, making sure he couldn't just walk away and leave me with nothing. He knew about the will. He'd been there when it was read. For a while, things were manageable. I got through high school, got a scholarship to study social work at McMaster, moved into residence. I came home on holidays. Kelsey came home too, and those visits had a kind of uneasy politeness to them, like everyone was being careful not to say the thing that was actually on their mind. When I turned 25, the trust was supposed to transfer. My mother's lawyer reached out to me directly, a kind older woman named Helen, who had known my mom since before I was born. She explained the process, told me what documents I'd need, and said it should all be straightforward. It wasn't. My father had hired his own lawyer. He was contesting the will on the grounds that my mother hadn't been of sound mind when she'd signed it, that her diagnosis had affected her judgment, that she'd been unduly influenced, that the trust arrangement was unfair given that he'd been the one paying the property taxes and maintaining the house for the past 16 years. I remember sitting in Helen's office when she told me this. I remember the way the afternoon light came through the window and landed on her desk. I didn't cry. I just felt this very still, very cold thing move through my chest. "He's going to fight it," I said. "It appears so," she said. "But Elise, I want you to understand, your mother was meticulous. She knew exactly what she was doing. The legal process took almost 2 years. 2 years of documents and depositions and a mediator who asked both of us to be civil in a room where civility felt like a costume neither of us was comfortable wearing. During that time, I kept coming to the house for the occasional dinner, kept trying to maintain something that looked like a relationship, because I genuinely didn't know how not to. He was the only parental figure I'd had for the past 22 years. Even a bad substitute is hard to walk away from when it's the only one you've ever known. Kelsey stayed out of it, mostly. She told me once, over coffee in a Tim Hortons near her apartment in Mississauga, that she thought her dad was wrong. "But he's my dad," she said, and shrugged in a way that meant, "What do you want me to do about it?" I didn't have an answer for that. I still don't. The dinner where everything finally broke open happened on a Saturday in early March. It had been one of those gray Hamilton winters, where the snow turns to slush and then freezes again overnight, and the whole city feels like it's holding its breath. I'd come over because he'd asked me to. He said he wanted to talk, that maybe we could find a resolution without the lawyers, that families shouldn't be doing this to each other. I should have known better. I did know better, actually. I came anyway. He'd made dinner, roast chicken, the same thing he used to make when I was a kid. There was a bottle of red wine open on the counter. He poured a glass for himself and one for me, and we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd done my homework for 12 years, and he started talking about legacy. He talked about how much he'd put into that house, how he'd reshingled the roof in 2011, how he'd replaced the furnace, how he'd been the one showing up, doing the work, being present, while I was off living my life in the city. He talked about Kelsey, how she might want to start a family soon, how the house could mean something real for her. He talked about my mother, carefully, like he was handling something fragile, and said he believed she would have wanted him to have security in his old age. He did not once, in that entire conversation, use the word you. Not in any way that meant me. I listened, I finished my wine, I set the glass down. And then he said it. Elise, I think you should consider dropping this. You have your career, your apartment, your whole life ahead of you. You don't need this house. And honestly? He paused. He looked at me across the table with an expression I can only describe as practiced patience. This isn't really your home. It never was. I think deep down you know that. The room went very quiet. I thought about my mother buying that house at 26, working doubles to make the mortgage payments. I thought about her planting that maple tree in the backyard the summer before she got sick. I thought about the yellow dress and the daisies and the 9-year-old version of me who thought sticking around meant something. I'm going to need you to leave, he said, when I didn't respond. I think this conversation is over, and I think it's time you went home. He said it so calmly, so reasonably. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. I looked at him for a moment, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years, and then I said very quietly, okay. I drove home. I did not cry in the car. I called Helen first thing Monday morning. What he didn't know, what he'd never thought to ask about, because it had never occurred to him that I might have been paying attention all along, was that I had already met with a property law specialist 3 months earlier, a woman named Dr. Adaeze Okonkwo, who taught at Osgood and took private consultations on estate disputes. I had brought her every document I had, every email from my stepfather's lawyer, every record of the trust arrangements, every piece of correspondence going back to the original will. She had been thorough and she had been honest. Your mother's will is solid, she'd told me. The contest is going to fail. The question is whether you want to settle or whether you want to go the full distance and establish the precedent clearly. I'd told her I wanted it clear. I also, on her advice, had done something else, something quiet. Over the past year, I had been documenting the property's condition. The roof he claimed to have reshingled had in fact been poorly done and was now leaking into the attic. I had a contractor's report to prove it. The furnace he'd replaced had been done without permits, which is a problem in Ontario when it comes time to sell or transfer a property. There were bylaw violations, unpaid municipal utility arrears from 2019 that he'd never resolved, and, most significantly, he had rented out my mother's house to a tenant for 8 months in 2021 without disclosing it, and without any legal authority to do so, which constituted a breach of the trust agreement. I hadn't confronted him with any of this. I had just gathered it. The mediator session that followed that dinner was the last one. My stepfather arrived with his lawyer, confident in the way people are confident when they believe they've already won. He had a counter-proposal ready. He was going to offer me a cash settlement, significantly below market value for a Hamilton property at that point, in exchange for me signing over any claim to the house. His lawyer slid the offer across the table. I slid my documentation back. I remember watching his face as he read through it. He got very still. He turned to his lawyer and said something quietly. His lawyer read the contractor's report, and then the utility arrears notice, and then the documentation about the unauthorized tenancy. There was a long silence. What is this? My stepfather said finally. It's a full accounting, I said, of the condition of the property and the management of the trust. He looked at me then the way he had at that kitchen table. Like he was waiting for me to back down, to be reasonable, to understand my place. I didn't look away. The settlement we reached was not complicated. The house transferred to me. He had 60 days to vacate, which was more than fair. He did not receive compensation for the maintenance he'd claimed. The contractor's report had effectively nullified that argument. He kept his furniture, his car, the RRSP he'd built on his own. We did not hug. We did not shake hands. His lawyer made a comment about hoping things could remain amicable. I said nothing to that. He moved out on a Tuesday. I know because I drove past that morning, not to watch, just because I was in the neighborhood, or maybe because I needed to see it to believe it. The truck was parked in front. There were boxes on the porch. He was carrying something down the front steps. I couldn't see what it was. I didn't stop. The first time I walked through the house alone, really alone, with the keys in my hand and no one else's name on anything. I stood in the front room for a long time. The bay window. The hardwood floors. The afternoon light coming through the glass and hitting the wall in a way that I recognized from childhood. From 1,000 Saturday mornings I could barely remember anymore. I walked out to the backyard. The maple tree my mother had planted was enormous now. Way bigger than I'd ever really registered while I was there as a kid. The trunk was thick, and the roots had started to lift one corner of the patio stones. It was a problem I'd probably need to deal with at some point. But standing under it in the early spring cold with the last of the snow still on the ground, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved, exactly. I felt something that's harder to name, like a door that had been locked for a very long time had finally opened, and the room on the other side wasn't what I'd spent 20 years imagining. It was just a room. A real one. With a leaky attic and a furnace installed without permits and a maple tree that was slowly reclaiming the patio, my mother's room. I sat down on the back step and I let myself cry for a while. Not about the house. Not about winning or losing or any of that. I cried because I'd spent the better part of my life trying to hold on to a version of family that was never actually there, and it had taken me, until I was 31 years old, to understand that letting go of that was not the same thing as giving up. I never needed him to give me that house. My mother already had. I needed him to be a father. That was the one thing no legal document could ever compel. Kelsey texted me 2 weeks after the move out. She said she was sorry for how things went. She said she hoped we could still get coffee sometime. I read the message and I sat with it for a few days before I replied. I told her I appreciated it. I told her I wasn't ready, but maybe someday. Maybe someday is enough for now. I've been in the house for 7 months. I had the attic repaired and the furnace properly certified. I repainted the kitchen a color my mother would have hated, a deep, warm terracotta, and I've decided that she would have come around to it eventually. I have a small herb garden on the back porch now. Basil, rosemary, flat-leaf parsley. I'm not a great gardener, but I'm learning. The maple tree is still there. I'm not touching it. Some things, you leave exactly where they are.